This is Chris Report, and he assured me that since Simon's down in Boulders, folks, this is Chris Wyatt reporting from South Africa. Hey folks, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Colonel retired Chris Wyatt sitting in central Pennsylvania with my special guest tonight. We're going to talk about this brouhaha, this well, I'm going to call it a bit of a scam, and we'll see if he agrees with that. It's Richard Wilkinson. Welcome back to the program. Or not welcome to the program. I shouldn't say welcome back. It's our first conversation ever. And I've mentioned this stream, and a number of my viewers were very excited about it. I had no idea that they knew about you so well. Now, you're an independent writer and an author, and you've been covering this story, which let me just frame this very quickly. You had an article recently, a very in-depth investigative article, and the title of it was How White Children and Teachers Are Being Systemically Targeted and Abused at Pretoria High School for Girls. That came out a short while ago on the 25th of July. We're talking, of course, about this situation where a WhatsApp group was used as an excuse to suspend 12 girls from the school. Many of them are prefects there, and that's kind of sets the stage. So welcome to the program, Richard. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Cool. Thank you so much, Colonel. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to have an American take such a close interest in South African affairs. Just before we went live, we were discussing some of the parallels between the two countries. We discussed Glenn Youngkin's victory in Virginia, and it's most interesting to see how some of the worst ideas of critical theory have been hatched in American universities and have then migrated across the Atlantic to South Africa. And that certainly was manifest this week or last 2 weeks at a school called the Pretoria High School for Girls, which is probably the most prominent public school in Pretoria, which is the capital city of South Africa. I don't know if most of your audience is South African or American.
About half my audience these days is South African. I do have a global audience, people in the communist paradise of China, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, all over the U.S., Canada, Europe. So I even get viewers in Finland that come in. So we have a diverse audience.
Yeah, you're saying the communist paradise of China and then sort of comma New Zealand or Ireland. I'm not sure if there needs to be a comma between, between all of those.
Well, I was going to say, New Zealand's not too far off with their fascist policies. But anyway.
Yeah, not too far off. But look, I was contacted 2 weeks ago by a father at Pretoria High School for Girls, and he told me about his situation. And his daughter had been suspended from the school, along with 11 other white girls, because they had been members of a WhatsApp group that allegedly participated in a racist conversation. And I drove through to Pretoria, and I met with 6 of the families, and I reviewed the WhatsApp conversation, which was utterly innocuous. There was really nothing there that was even controversial. And I thought it was all very odd. And I wrote an article called How the Gauteng Education Department is Mishandling Yet Another Racism Incident at Pretoria High School for Girls. Incidentally, I run a website called schoolcapture.com where I publish my essays, and I've published 16 of them now. And so I'm also very active on Twitter where I tweet about this stuff. And I've been going on this now for over a year. Since about May 2023 is when I published my first essay. And I was very active on Twitter for at least a year before that as well. And so this father knew about me, contacted me. I got involved. I started helping. I published an article that I thought would kill the issue, where I basically highlighted what a farce this was. The letter of suspension didn't even tell the girls what they'd done wrong. I think 7 of the girls didn't even participate in the conversation. Some of them were playing hockey when the conversation happened. They weren't even in the group. Well, they were in the group, but they weren't in the conversation. And as I said, the conversation is totally benign. It's a group of girls. The one girl goes into the group and complains about a conversation which she had with a black girl, where a black girl had alleged that the school's uniform standards don't apply evenly between white and black. And she expressed to her friends in the group that this was, a really disturbing and uncomfortable conversation. She wanted to cry, and she's sick of the race baiting that goes on at the school. And then each of the girls then chimed in with their own sort of experience of race baiting and how they found the school to be a hostile and unfriendly environment. And that's really the sum total of the conversation. So I wrote my first article on Wednesday last week. They proceeded with, it was Wednesday last week? Yeah. not last week, the week before, the Gauteng Education Department went with this massive media campaign against the girls, every newspaper, television studio. So I then published a second article, which is the one that got all the attention. It's called How White Children and Teachers Are Being Systematically Targeted and Abused at Pretoria High School for Girls. And then I wrote a third article about the diversity consultants who have been brought in to fix the problem. And shortly after I published that third article, the outcome of the disciplinary hearing was made public, and it confirmed that all 12 girls were found not guilty of racism and hate speech, which is what the charge was. And so, yeah, I've been involved in that in the last 2 weeks.
Well, you mentioned that it says that, oops, give me just a second there. Sorry, I got carried away. You mentioned that it's they're found not guilty, but the text of the reading doesn't really exonerate them fully. It says there's insufficient evidence found, and therefore they're not guilty. In fact, the information I saw in that article that got all the attention, I see it's innocuous. I didn't see all the screenshots. You've seen them. You've seen the entire conversations. To me, they should be exonerated, and not for insufficient evidence, but for the fact that there was nothing there. That's what I see.
Yeah, Chris, where do you see, I'm interested to see where you got that insufficient evidence line from, because the Gauteng Education Department put out a press release today where they said that the girls were found not guilty of violence and racism on the basis of insufficient evidence. And that simply is not what's written in the judgment.
Right, that's what I'm saying. The Gauteng Department of Education did put that release out. That's what I'm talking about. They shouldn't be reporting that. That's fake news. It's not on the basis of insufficient evidence. That's nonsense. I mean, this is, look, I mean, the reason I invited you on is, look, let's be clear for the audience. My audience knows that I detest racism in all forms.
Sure.
And I've spent most of my life living in unusual circumstances, frequently a minority, and maybe that's why I have empathy when people are abused and targeted. Any racism is just not acceptable. We're all the same. Nobody's better than anyone else. Some of us just apply ourselves better than others. We're all created we're all endowed by our Creator with certain rights, as we say in American, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. My point here is that if there is racism, then it should be called out, and the people doing it should be shunned and excluded from community activities, because you don't want to be around these people. But I'm also hot on the issue of race hustling and race baiting, which is what goes on. And what I've seen in my time, Richard, in South Africa, which has been hundreds of visits, and I've spent years in South Africa in total, what I've seen in my experience at the end of apartheid is a progressively increasing campaign, whether consciously or unconsciously, to abuse white South Africans, in particular Afrikaners, but not exclusively, white South Africans, and also coloreds, but to a lesser degree, always accusing them of racism when someone's feelings are hurt or when someone feels they didn't get something, and having this dual standard. And that is just as bad as out. It's the same thing. It's no difference. And that's why I want to get you on here to talk about this, because the Gauteng report, which was in the Independent line, that's a funny publication. Anyway, I've got lots of beefs with them right now. They've got punked on that video with Ronaldo Guz. Wait till the court case comes in that. They're going to lose a lot of money because they played an altered video to create a false impression. Not that Ronaldo was behaving well at the age of 26. He was making a point. But anyway, so back to this. So the IOL said this today. They said insufficient evidence. That's the point I'm making. That is fake news. That is incorrect. The reason it's dismissed is because there was nothing. They were exonerated completely, correct?
Absolutely. They're absolutely exonerated. The findings of the judgment. You know what, Chris? Do you mind if I just jump into my WhatsApps and bring up the...
Yeah, that's quite all right.
I'm going to read you what the judgment says.
Sure.
And I don't think I'm breaching any, judgment should be made public so people can see what's going on. Now, I'm going to go to page 19, which is the verdict. Given the judicial weight of the authorities referred to above, regarding charge 1, we were unable to find from any of the contents of the group chat messages that constitute extreme detestation and vilification, which risks provoking discriminatory activities against that group. Consequently, the charge cannot be sustained. Regarding charge 2, given the absence of discriminatory language based on race, we are unable to see how that charge could be sustained. In the premise, it is our considered view that with respect to the two main charges, all 12 learners are not guilty. So the issue of there not being evidence just doesn't make sense, because this is the WhatsApp conversation. If it were a case that somebody alleged that somebody said something on a sports field, but there wasn't a witness, well, then you could say there's insufficient evidence. Here, all the evidence, there is sufficient evidence. There's total wall-to-wall coverage of the evidence. Yeah. The allegation that the WhatsApp group expressed racist sentiments, and they took a transcript straight out of the WhatsApp group. That's all the evidence you could possibly want. There is no other evidence that could possibly exist. They've got all the evidence. And the chairman and his two panel members assessed the evidence, and on the basis of the evidence that was there, which is all of the evidence, they determined that the charges were not sustained and that the 12 children should be found not guilty. So that's a willful and completely false distortion by the Gauteng Education Department. And that's not the only distortion they made in that press release that they put out today. Now I'm going to go through this press release with you. It says, according to the report, the school governing body found the implicated learners not guilty of the charges of violence and bullying. Not true. There was never a charge of violence.
Yeah,
there's no violence.
That kind of disturbs me. That disturbs me greatly. I never saw anything about violence until this nonsense from the Gauteng. Listen, these people are out of control. We'll talk about that, but please continue.
So there was no charge of violence. Disruptive behavior, well, no. I mean, that's not what the charge was. Violation of school rules. The charges against the learners included violence and bullying, disruptive behavior, and violation of school rules. So that's according to today's Gauteng Education press release. If I go back to the actual judgment, which is over... sorry, Chris.
No, it's quite all right. But let me just go on while you're looking for that.
Yeah.
Bring that up. So here's a quote from that, and it says they're going to double down. This recourse, which the MEC has decided to pursue, will not investigate the 12 learners, but rather allegations that racism exists at the school. So since they can't slander and tar and feather these innocent young girls, which they've harmed them. There should be actually there should be a financial payout here, in my view, because of these false allegations. But they can't harm the girls, so now they're going to try to paint the school as a racist. They said this decision is further motivated by the fact that the report of the SGB, that's the panel, ruling makes no mention of racism or discrimination against learners, whereas there has been a strong presumption of the existence of such at the school. Excuse me? Presumption of existence of racism in school? By whom? Who has a presumption of that?
It's complete nonsense. Just to confirm, the precise charges were simply racism and hate speech. There was no mention of violence or disruptive behavior.
Exactly.
So the Gauteng Education Department is grossly incompetent to the point where it's impossible to believe that these people can be this incompetent and that they're actually being willfully mendacious towards these children. And this is not the first time that I've pointed this out. Unbelievably, when the story first broke nearly 2 weeks ago, Gauteng Education Department officials arrived at the school and spoke at assembly on 2 occasions. On the first occasion, a man gets up there, his name is Mr. Homo, from the Gauteng Education Department, and he announces that they've decided to suspend these girls. And he says to the girls, should we expel them? Should we debadge the prefects? And all the girls cheer in loud approval. That was the first appalling incident, and a number of the accused girls were in the assembly. They ran out of the assembly, grabbed their bags, and went and hid in classrooms because they were so scared. And secondly, the following Wednesday, a guy called Andrisen Kadimeng from the Gauteng Education Department arrives at the school. And he gets up and makes a speech where he says that the department will act decisively against racism regardless of whether there is tangible evidence or not. Which is the most extraordinary statement. It basically indicates that the department doesn't care if there's evidence. The department is simply going to be taking gratuitous vindictive action against white people on the basis of them just being white. Now, both of these officials should be suspended. And there should be full disciplinary action against them.
Suspended, investigated. There should be, and maybe charges because of the harm that I don't know what charge apply, but that was clearly an attempt to encourage students to take action, physical action, or to demonize or to bully these girls based on nonsense. Here's the problem with this, Richard. The presumption that white people are racist. That's where we start with this. Everything is a presumption that white people are racist. And if they're not, they have to prove that they're not racist by kowtowing to a corrupt bunch of politicians, whether it's there or here. It's the same thing here. All you have to be it used to be when I was younger, if you were married and had an affair, you were done. That was bad news. Now everybody has affairs. No one cares about that. But now if someone calls you racist, it's a serious thing. And it's even more serious in South Africa. I mean, this all goes back. It drives me nuts. During the build-up to the 2019 World Cup in Japan, where I spent a month, and I'm a Springbok fan. You probably figured that out. But during the build-up to that, this nonsense that occurred in the Western Cape where Eben Etzebeth was accused of a racial incident by a colored gentleman who assaulted him outside of a pub. And then the South African Captured Human Rights Commission assumed he was guilty and started going after Etzebeth to disrupt the spring. It always happens this way. Now, anyway, I'll let you continue. I'm getting kind of wound up here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we need to acknowledge the totally out of control nature of the Gauteng Department of Education. It is a predatory organization. It does not have the best interests of learners at heart, not just these children, but all the children at the school. They went on to suspend the principal of the school.
I saw that.
On the basis that she didn't handle the racism incident properly. We've now had it determined conclusively that there was no racial incident to even speak of. So why has her suspension not been lifted? It should have been lifted immediately.
It hasn't been lifted.
No. On Friday, the outcome was handed down on Thursday night. Everyone agreed to keep the outcome confidential so the Gauteng Education Department could be properly briefed on Friday morning. They were told what the outcome was on Friday morning. They failed to come and pick up the ruling from the school. And so eventually at about 1:00 in the afternoon, the school releases the findings. And then the departmental spokesman, Steve Mabena, goes on TV and says he's very disappointed that the Gauteng Education Department wasn't informed beforehand. Again, yet another instance of dishonesty. Which is really pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. And what makes this even worse is that, well, there are two more points which I think really need to be highlighted here. The first is the total failure of the South African press to get a grip on what's going on. They just act as stenographers of the government. They amplify the department's narrative. Every press release that's put out, ENCA, Newsroom Africa, simply run with the narrative. Even after the outcome of the findings was made public, Newsroom Africa had a number of guests on their show who were speaking as if the girls had been found guilty, as if these people only have one particular program setting, which is that white people are racist, and they're just slandering everyone in sight. And the second thing that needs to be pointed out, perhaps we can deal with these one at a time, but we've got the fact that we got the EFF standing at the gates of the school last week. Many of the EFF activists so drunk that they could hardly stand. Standing alongside a group of schoolgirls in school uniform chanting "Kill the Boer." I mean, it's just absolutely unbelievable.
Well, this stuff is not harmless. I mean, look what happened at Brockenfell. Unbelievable. Utter nonsense. So Brockenfell is an area that's overwhelmingly white and colored. Virtually no black students live in Brockenfell. I've been there dozens of times, including just a couple weeks ago. And the EFF started this nonsense, and they marched on it. And then, look, the behavior of some of the parents who showed up and got in fisticuffs was not appropriate. Let's be honest about that. But that doesn't justify the EFF showing with thousands of people in violation of a court order. They were authorized a certain number. They came there to intimidate learners and the teachers because no black instructors were at the school. Well, there's almost no black students. The only black students are there are mostly scholarship students brought in from other communities to give them an opportunity at a better school. And then what do? They behave atrociously. They throw stones and bottles and attack people. And then when the police chase them away with water cannons, one of the few water cannons apparently working in South Africa at that time, they chase them away with water cannons. The EFF go and vandalize a car dealership and destroy dozens of brand new cars in a car dealership. This has serious implications. We saw this with the Brendan Horner situation in Senekal, this rabble rousing. And let's be clear. We're not talking about most South Africans. We're talking about a small number, white, black, and brown, mostly black in this case. We're talking about people who are advocating for black supremacy and the abuse of people based on the premises that white people are inherently racist, which is nonsense. Any Homo sapien is capable of racism. Racism, my definition, Richard, I'll share my definition. Racism to me is when someone believes that people are different races, which I find nonsense. Otherwise, we'll be able to knock boots and have kids. But that in another race, that you're better than another race or a group is better than another race and that they deserve advantage or disadvantage based on it. That's racism to me. And that's what we see on full display in South Africa, whether it's the Tourism Relief Fund or it's BEE, the list goes on. And this situation in the Pretoria High School for Girls, it's shocking.
Yeah, look, I agree. Look, my definition of racism is bullying or discrimination on the basis of race. And there simply was no bullying or discrimination on the basis of race in this particular case. Ironically, I can find plenty of bullying and discrimination on the basis of race being committed by the EFF. But and being committed by the Gauteng Education Department. There's a strange thing. It's called the iron law of woke projection. Not only are their allegations false, but they are guilty of the very allegations that they make against other people. I'm talking about woke activists. And that's absolutely the case in this situation. And I think that having the EFF at the gates of the school, chanting "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," it goes far beyond protesting, far beyond freedom of speech. It is a very, very real threat to the children at that school. And I've had parents call me who've told me that they rush around to pick up their daughters, or they've kept their daughters at home because they had concerns about the physical safety of their children. And I'm not just talking about the 12 accused children, I'm talking about any white child in that school, and indeed a number of black parents as well, who feel completely unhappy, and understandably so, that the EFF is at the gates of the school chanting "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." And this is entirely due to the actions of the Gauteng Department of Education, which have now been shown to be, well, they were in any case completely unacceptable, but the charges have now been shown to be without merit. And the media has played a major role in amplifying this crisis at every step of the way, specifically ENCA and Newsroom Africa. And I think there need to be very severe consequences for everybody involved.
Well, I'd like to throw one more in the mix, and that, of course, is IOL. IOL is also one of these hustling. They have one journalist that all he does, almost every article, is trying to divide South Africans on race, making allegations and claims are non-existent, and then never correcting the record after the fact. That's the journalist. I use the term loosely, journalist. Look, I've worked with South African journalists, and I'll just make this statement clear, and if it hurts journalists' feelings, they should get over it. The state of journalism in South Africa is abysmal. I'll give you a perfect example. I was at the multi-party charter convention, the only American journalist covering it, and the journalists who were there, this is some of the stuff that went on. We're waiting because the negotiations were in private. They're discreet. The press can't be in the room. And a lot of journalists didn't like that. They're like, well, we should be in the room. First off, you really don't get what journalism is. You shouldn't be in the room. Anyway, second, we're waiting, and it's after 4 o'clock, and they start belly aching and moaning. Oh, well, if this was a DA run event, we'd be out of here already. Excuse me, dude, you're a journalist. Your job is to cover the news. This is a breaking story about this coalition that didn't achieve what it wanted to, but that's your job. And then the writing that goes on. But the IOL is, look, that publication. So last week, we had 6 different stories on the same day in News 24, in IOL, in Times Live, across the board. The exception was Daily Maverick. I don't think they had anything on it. And they're running different stories that were trying to divide people by race. And all of them were false. All of them had misleading information. It's egregious. I mean, I asked the question, does South Africa not have a press ombudsman? Apparently you don't, because there's no recourse here. There is for broadcasting, but I don't know if there is for print. It's really sad to see what's going on here. Now, before I give back to you, there was a mention in your tweet about McKaiser. Now, that guy, how does he come into this? What did he flame this or what? Fuel the flames?
So Eusebius McKaiser died just over a year ago. He died in May 2023. And the very first article that I published was called The Dubious Ethics of Loveland and Wadai and Eusebius McKaiser. Eusebius McKaiser was a radio personality in South Africa, and he ran the most prominent slot on the most prominent talk radio station called 702. He had the 9 o'clock until midday slot on South Africa's #1 English language talk radio station. And for about the best part of a decade, he indulged in the most vitriolic race baiting that you can possibly imagine. I mean, he was disgusting. And one of his favorite things was to amplify racism scandals at schools. And so I started looking into this, and I saw that he was very close friends with a diversity and transformation consultant called Loveland Inwadai, a Nigerian woman who often was on his show. And I went and looked into some of the allegations that they were amplifying and discovered that they were completely bogus, completely false. And then I saw that Eusebius was promoting her business and trying to help her win diversity contracts at various institutions and schools. And I thought that that was a gross conflict of interest. And so I wrote an article about it, and he died 2 weeks after I published my article. And the full story of school capture goes far beyond just Pretoria High School for Girls. There's hardly a prominent school in South Africa or university in South Africa that hasn't been afflicted by this. And it's a 3-step process. The step 1 is you come up with racism allegations, you amplify it in the media. Step 2 is you get the charge of racism to stick to the institution, and you do that through a legal process. And I've written extensively about how many of those legal inquiries are highly suspect and often rely upon concepts from the world of critical race theory in order to get a conviction for racism. So they'll say, yes, there is racism at the school because we found 2 teachers who committed microaggressions. That's what happened at St Mary's Waverley. It's what certainly is what is reflected in Rodine's discipline policy and so on. And then step 3 is once you've got that label of racism to stick to the school, you then bring in the diversity consultants. And what's interesting about that particular point is that the firm of diversity consultants who've been brought in at Pretoria High School for Girls are actually closely connected to the Gauteng ANC. It's the Matthew Goniwe School of Leadership, and the board of directors of the Matthew Goniwe School of Leadership is basically every prominent ANC leader in Gauteng. So connect the dots.
It's interesting you say that because that's where the dots been connected here. You talk about how this grew in American universities. It did. But the first instantiation of it where it really picked up, we could see, is not in America. It didn't gain traction in America initially. It gained traction in South Africa. The fees must fall nonsense. That came out of that critical race theory, all these other things. And now what was generated here in intellectual circles has gone there and come back here with a vengeance. It's really, it's interesting you talk about the diversity consultants. I mean, we look at every university in America and even high schools paying people $160,000, $200,000 a year to be diversity consultants. Listen, I spent 36 and a half years in the Army, 34. And one of the big complaints I made frequently is, and I said this to the Army, although they don't like hearing, I said, why is our equal opportunity NCO always a woman or a black soldier? We're all responsible for equal opportunity. We're all responsible, and you shouldn't always have a minority there, or and women are very much a minority in the military. I said, that's not very diverse, that's not very effective. To assume that someone, because of the way they look or because of where they come from, is a certain way is a foolhardy, it's a fool's errand. I mean, for instance, I grew up in a housing project that was all black, 300 families, 3 white, lived in a poor part of Buffalo, New York. That was, for some reason, Puerto Ricans went there. I don't know why. It's cold as bejesus in Buffalo, New York, and Puerto Ricans moved there. And then I lived all over Africa. Of course, I've lived in places that were all white as well. My high school was all white. Not because the people were racist, but because black folks weren't dumb enough to move to rural Appalachia where we had no electricity and we just paved our roads. The point is looking at people and making that judgment. This is just wrong. Yeah, McKaiser, I wanted to ask that question because I didn't get a chance to read the tweet. And I'm like, isn't he dead? And I saw it mentioned there. And I think the point you're making in that tweet was that he was kind of the guy that really pushed this for a long time. Interesting.
Well, it all exploded in June 2020. I mean, George Floyd died in May 2020, and in June 2020, virtually every school in South Africa had a major anti-racism campaign. And McKaiser was very much alive in June 2020, and he, in June 2020, was amplifying the matter on radio, getting people fired from their jobs. And every school got hit by this like a tornado or a hurricane or a nuclear bomb, whatever metaphor you prefer. And he died 2 weeks after I wrote my expose on him, and I've now gone and written 15 other essays on the topic.
Well, this is,
and I've got another 20 or 30 I want to write.
Oh, good Lord. You got quite a bit to say there. That's good. But this is especially egregious, and this is what irritates me. I go back to South Africa frequently, and we are now 30 years past the end of apartheid, more than 30. 92 was when the referendum was, which basically dismantled all the racist legislation for the most part that was under apartheid. But that's when the change began. In 94, you had the first democratic elections. And we're talking about kids that are born 15 years after the ANC took control of the country with majority rule. And they're being harassed because of this worldview by a group of people that just want to destroy. And it's really sad to see. It's really, really sad to see because, here's the thing. Now, if I'm wrong, if I'm not mistaken, these girls were about to go to their matrix in a few weeks, right? To take these exams.
Yeah, so it's called matric, your final year, and you write your preliminary. I don't know what the American equivalent is, but it's your senior year of high school, and you write your preliminary exams. They're due to write now in about 1 week's time.
Right,
2 weeks ago.
So they're about to go to what decides whether they can. Of course, we know the standards are higher for white students, requiring them to go into UCT and places like that in Rhodes. So now they're about to go into the matrix, and they've got this being accused of racism, being kicked out of school. That's on their mind. This is. You have to wonder if the timing wasn't maliciously intentional as well.
It absolutely was maliciously intentional. It often coincides with exams. There's another point I didn't mention, which is that I received a video of a black girl at the school from February this year where she said, sort of jokingly, "Oh, we haven't made any white people bow down to us so far." Let me get you the exact text.
I listened to that video. It was on your site, but then the sound was blocked out. The video was blurred, so we couldn't see the girl. But then the audio disappeared too. I don't know what happened there.
It says, guys, I've not even asked a single white person to bow down. We just forgot about it. Guys, we let them off the hook this year. I think it's because we're in matric and there's no time. We're feeling sorry for them. But come April on Freedom Day, they will feel the wrath. So this is just a whimsical video of a girl basically saying that entrapment and targeting of white girls is just completely routine in that school. And this isn't the first racism issue that Pretoria Girls has had.
There's your racism.
Well, there's your racism.
If they want to investigate, there you go.
Well, they can go and investigate themselves. I mean, it's just the whole thing is absolutely unbelievable. And so now we get this press statement today saying they accept the outcome of the disciplinary, where they misquote every aspect of what happened in the disciplinary. They say they accept the result. And they say, well, we're going to launch a broader, more open-ended investigation into racism at the school. And at some point, we need to acknowledge this for what it is. It's harassment. It's vexatious. It's frivolous, and it's harassment. And unless you have prima facie evidence of racism, there's absolutely no ground for the school, for the department to go and launch a major investigation into the school. It's just a waste of everybody's time. The school needs to go back to being what it is, which is a school, not a WWE wrestling ring for washed up politicians from the ANC who just got defeated in the last election and are only kept alive because the EFF and MK in Gauteng propped them up. I mean, it's interesting for me. Of course, South Africa is a special case in this regard because of the history. But in my view, anybody's welcome to be a racist or bigot all they want. If they act on that, then we have a problem. You can't control people's thoughts. You can't control who they are. And it's unfortunate that people are bigots and racist. But the government policing that, I mean, if South Africa doesn't have free speech, I mean, if you utter the K word in South Africa, they're going to come after you. To me, people that behave in that fashion, you simply ignore them. And you ostracize them, and you don't interact with them, and then if they don't learn their lesson. But when governments attempt to control speech, that's one thing, but they're trying to control thought as well in South Africa. This is. I mean, it's a fool's errand for governments to do this, and it's really caustic. We can see what it does to society. And what's so frustrating for me, Richard, on this is that, look, I go everywhere in South Africa. I've been every province so many times, met so many people. I hang out with black South Africans, Tswana, Basotho, especially Tswana, lots of colored South Africans, Indian South Africans on occasion, white South Africans, Afrikaners, English, Portuguese, lots of people, Venda, everybody. And most people that I meet don't care about this garbage. They just want to live a life. They want to worship the way they want to worship. They want to raise their kids. They want to live in safety, things that South Africa doesn't have. And then this seems to just hold South Africa back. It's really sad. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Look, the South African Institute of Race Relations has done a number of surveys and extensive quantitative research. And they are adamant that race relations in South Africa are generally pretty good. And I agree with them. I think that on the whole, in the shopping centers and the schools of South Africa, sorry, let me take that back. In the shopping centers, in the neighborhoods, in the airports and so on of South Africa, black and white South Africans get along fine. But what is clear is that amongst the intellectual elite of South Africa, there is a virus that is absolutely rife, and that's the virus of critical race theory. So when I speak of the intellectual elite, I'm basically talking of three sectors. The first is the media, the second is academia, and the third is law. That's where I think it's most rife. So if you are at a university campus, you will be beset with racial strife all day, every day. And if you are working in a newsroom, if you're working at 702 Radio, that's what these guys deal in every day. And sometimes these three circles intersect. Sometimes you have a legal academic on the radio, and then you're going to have, pure critical race theory all day long. And I actually went and had a look at the recent election results from 2024. And what's really interesting is that the EFF doesn't do very well in most parts of the country. We know that they're a 9.5% party. They get just over 9% of the vote. But what's fascinating is when you look at where their votes are clustered, they do extremely well in universities. Yeah. So in a place like Cape Town, if you look at the Observatory and Rondebosch voting districts, the EFF comes first. They get 30-40%. They do better than the DA. Every other voting district around them is a dark shade of blue because the DA is shooting the lights out with 80%. But in Observatory, they do very well because that's where the student reses are. And I went and looked at Port Elizabeth. I looked at Johannesburg, Pretoria. Wherever you find a student res or a university campus, the EFF will do very well. And so that is what's happening, is that the universities have radicalized the students. I actually wrote an essay entitled How South Africa's Universities Are Training Teachers to be Woke Commissars, where I looked at the curriculum coming out of the Nelson Mandela University's education faculty, and it's just importing critical race theory and identity politics from America, and some of the more bizarre Marxist principles. And that's what's going on in our universities. And that's why the kids in university are so radical. And what's happened is that's been transmitted into the schools, which is why we have these things happening at Pretoria High School for girls. But it's not a reflection of the rest of South Africa. The rest of South Africa is fine. It's the elite that's a problem.
Absolutely. And it's the same thing on this side. It's mostly something being done by elites. But it's not exclusively by elites, but it's overwhelmingly by the elites who push this garbage. And we see it. It's not just the racism, it's anti-Semitism. I mean, it's ironic because our Ivy League schools for a couple centuries were WASPy institutions, that acronym, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which described a lot of America for much of our history. I'm a WASP, but that described us for a long time.
I guess I am as well.
Yeah, it's a White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Anyway, but the point is that was what the Ivy Leagues, all the instructors, all the professors, all the administrators in Yale, Harvard, Columbia, for centuries, that's who they were. That shifted, and in the 20th century, a lot of the administrators and the faculty became Jewish, and these institutions became overwhelmingly Jewish. And not that matters, but what I'm saying is that transitioned starting in the 1980s to something very different, and now it's very woke. And it's very anti-Semitic. It's very anti-Christian. It's very anti-white. And it's disgusting. It's unbelievable what's going on in our universities here. And it's finally getting attention because of the outrageously ridiculous testimony of Claudine Gay. By the way, let me put the marker out there once again. Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard University, is less qualified to be the president than I am. I have 2 academic book publications. She has 0. And I have more articles published than her. So I'll take the job. I'm just saying.
Claudine Gay has got an interesting South African counterpart, Mamokgethi Phakeng, who was the catastrophic vice chancellor of the University of Cape Town. Like Claudine Gay, had to be removed from her position because her stewardship of the university was so bad. But I think that both Claudine Gay and Mamokgethi Phakeng are a diversion from the real problem. And the real problem is their immediate predecessors. At the University of Cape Town, that was a guy called Max Price, who was a white man, who was extremely woke and who was very prominently trying to decolonize the University of Cape Town. Max Price entrenched race-based policies when it comes to admissions and hiring and promotions. And he opened the floodgates to fallism. When the initial Fallist protest happened, Max Price not only failed to stop it, but he amplified it, he endorsed it, he legitimized it, he validated the basic principles of fallism. And there's been no stopping fallism ever since. It simply mutated into from Rhodes must fall to fees must fall. And then it metastasized and it spread to every campus in the country. And so I think Mamokgethi Phakeng was terrible, but I think the real finger of blame needs to be pointed at Max Price.
No, I think
which is an essay I want to write. And I don't know who was responsible for breaking Harvard, but somebody was, and I don't think it was Claudine Gay. She's a symptom of the problem. She's not the problem.
No, she's just a incompetent idiot that was hired that couldn't explain what was going on campus. It was epic watching that testimony. These people were unbelievable. It's like watching the Secret Service try to defend Butler, Pennsylvania. There's no defense. There's no defense. I mean, and it was unbelievable. But you're onto something there from my view. My own research, and of course, I cover the elections extensively in South Africa. I was there for this election, but I cover these elections, the municipal elections and the national elections. And one thing I said in this election, of course, I've said that the EFF would never get 15% on the national level. It's just simply not going to happen. There aren't that many stupid people in South Africa. But in this election, I predicted 9 to 11% for them. And the reason I predicted that is because they were focusing on the campuses. There's only so many votes on campus. There's only so many universities. That's not enough votes to get you over the hump. And the other thing I said was going to eat them alive, and this is what destroyed them. Look at KZN. MK completely obliterated. Everybody's talking about how the ANC was hurt by MK. Not really, if you look at the numbers. They were injured, but that's not why they're not ruling. They lost 4 million votes for other reasons. They didn't lose 4 million votes to MK. But the EFF lost votes to MK. They got obliterated in KZN. They're almost not even there. Less than 2%.
They got 2%.
Yeah, 2% in KZN. Yeah. And they thought that was going to be their big game was in KZN. It's not. And look, I agree with you 100%. The EFF tries this intellectual nonsense, which is funny because the people leading the party, I'm not going to say they aren't very bright, but they certainly aren't very intellectual. But they're always doing this race hustling thing, whether it's in Phoenix with their demonstrations or it's in Brockenfell or Senecal.
H&M.
Yeah. It's
Pretoria Girls. It's all the same. It's all the same thing.
Let's not forget the Clicks scandal. You know, they firebombed with a petrol bomb one of the locations. They physically attacked 43 locations and no consequences. That was a call for domestic terrorism. They threatened.
Yeah.
By the way, it's a majority black-owned company, and the manager who put put the thing up was actually black and simply copied it from a European. Anyway, this goes on and on here. It's just you talk about the origins of this. You talk about Price down there in Cape Town. So where do we go from here? I mean, who cares? Who's listening? I mean, it seems like the political elites love this fodder to draw attention away from what's really going on or to get votes from a particular base, whether it's in America or it's on your side of the Atlantic. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, look, I think another angle on this is that there's a government of national unity, as you well know, between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, and that, in theory, should bring the government closer to the center of South African politics. Not the ANC is very left-wing to begin with, but the EFF and MK are even further left-wing, and they're sort of paramilitary, and they have genocidal rhetoric. So with the ANC teaming up with the DA, in many respects, the South African government should become more moderate, more sensible, more pro-economic growth. And this, what is absolutely clear is that the Gauteng Provincial ANC does not share the appetite of the national body to have a coalition with the DA, and they would far prefer to have a coalition with the EFF, which is what they already have at a local level in the city of Johannesburg and in the city of Ekurhuleni, which is another municipality in Gauteng. And so I think what is very clear is that a lot of these racism scandals in schools are being instigated by political actors in order to try and disrupt racial harmony in South Africa and try and make it impossible for black and white people to work together, and in so doing try to break apart the government of national unity. And I think that is absolutely clear that that's the strategy, and I think it's completely ignored by the media, the mainstream media.
Well, I think you're onto a very good point there, talking about the province, and that just brings up the question of Panyaza Lesufi as the premier of Gauteng province. Does he even pay attention to this? Has he ever commented on this situation? Not Pretoria Girls High, but what's going on with the Gauteng Department of Education? Because ostensibly they work for him.
Well, he was the former MEC of Education in Gauteng before he became the Premier. And during his tenure as the MEC of Education, he was heavily involved in the Annika Smith matter. The Annika Smith matter.
There we have our answer, but go ahead.
Yeah. So Annika Smith was a teacher at a school in Pretoria West, and she made a comment in a class where she said, "Oh, you girls are so poorly misbehaved. Do I need to get a polisie mannetjie in order to enforce discipline in the class?" Now, polisie mannetjie is an Afrikaans word. Polisie man is the Afrikaans word for policeman, and polisie mannetjie is the diminutive of a policeman. It happens all the time in Afrikaans where they like to come up with a diminutive version of different words. So it's sort of like a jokey comment, just policie mannetjie. Anyway, some kid decided that she said police monkey and was referring to a policeman as being a monkey, which is complete nonsense. It's absolutely not what you were saying. And she was put into disciplinary, found guilty, fired from her job. She went to the department. She wanted transcripts from her disciplinary, which she was not given. And she eventually got legal assistance from, I think, Solidarity, which is a trade union. Yeah. And they took up her case, and she appealed to the MEC, Panyaza Lesufi, who dismissed her appeal. And eventually she was exonerated, and it took 10 months, but she got her job back. And this was Panyaza Lesufi's education department. Another example is a guy called Keith Arlo, who was a geography teacher at St. John's College in Johannesburg. And Keith Arlo was dismissed from his job after he was accused of making racial comments. And he was dismissed from his job by the school after Panyaza Lesufi drove round to the school and said, if you don't fire this guy by 1 o'clock, I'm going to deregister your school. And St. John's buckled and they fired him. And he was then referred to the South African Council of Education, which is the regulatory body for teachers. And they conducted an investigation, and I've driven round to the South African Council of Education and I asked them for the file, and it's now been confirmed to me on paper that Keith Arlo was exonerated. He was cleared by that investigation. So those are just two. I'm in the process of doing a freedom of information request so I can figure out exactly what happened in that matter. But those are just two examples of cases where Panyaza Lesufi's education department, this is before he became the premier, was involved in highly incompetent and very heavy-handed abuse of white teachers. So he's got a long track record in this area. There was a creche that he tried to climb over the wall of the creche because he thought there was a racist teacher there. I mean, the man is obsessed with this topic, and he is a highly destructive individual. And he's now been promoted to be the premier of the province. And the current education MEC is a guy called Matome Chilwane. And judging by his recent antics, he is going to be continuing with Panyaza Lesufi's toxic legacy in this area.
So what is the recourse here other than exposure? Is it legal? Is that the way to go? I mean, is that, I mean, apparently I wouldn't want to be a teacher in Gauteng, that's for sure, with this nonsense going on. In fact, I'd be concerned about being a teacher. And of course, I'm a university lecturer, but I'd be concerned about being a teacher at a primary school or at a secondary school, anywhere in South Africa where this nonsense is going on. It's ridiculous. I mean, and, the real issues in South Africa, I mean, you look at KZN, where it's common practice for teachers to sleep with prepubescent and pubescent girls for grades. And, how about some focus on that? Or children dying in pit latrines in the Eastern Cape on a frequent basis. I mean, these are real issues for education. Or textbooks on a BE tender never delivered to schools in the Eastern Cape, and they have no chalkboards, they have no electricity, they have no flush toilets, and we're talking 30 years later. Meanwhile, every single day we uncover yet another scam where money disappeared with ANC politicians around the country. It seems to me that people like Panyaza Lesufi and this clown who's now in the Gauteng Department of Education are political hacks who are put there to achieve a goal. But I think you touched on something that might be interesting here with the Government of National Unity. It does seem very clear, based on the actions forming a provincial government of unity, which isn't a government of unity, just like the national one isn't, just a grand coalition, that there is clearly a disconnect or a lack of control by the ANC National Executive Committee over its cadres in Gauteng. They seem to be running wild on the reservation. Am I missing something?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think for whatever reason, the Gauteng ANC is on a different wavelength to the national body. I don't pretend to fully understand all of the ins and outs of Gauteng of ANC politics. Not a topic that I really want to spend much time on either. But it's a highly destructive group that are currently in power. So you said what recourse is there? Well, I think step one is to expose this stuff. And for many years during fallism, I expected somebody in the media to expose what was really going on with fallism, and it didn't happen. And I suddenly realized there was a gap in the market, and I didn't realize how big that gap was until recently. As I said, I've now written 16 articles on this topic, and I've built up a network of close to 100 people who I consult with regularly. And in this particular case, we were assisted by a group of advocates who came through from the Pretoria Bar. For your American listeners, that's basically lawyers, right? And they came and did excellent work on a pro bono, no fee basis, and represented the girls brilliantly and got them acquitted. And I did my best to drive the PR narrative against Gauteng Education Department. And we won. And we put some points on the board. And I think I just need to go school by school now and expose each of these instances of abuse and try and build up as big an audience as possible and get as many people as possible educated on how the syndicate works. Because it is a syndicate. It's a syndicate of consultants working in league with politicians and journalists. And I think once we've built up enough public awareness, we can then try to turn the tide. And I think we have turned the tide at Pretoria Girls. And I think that eventually the wheels are going to come off this racket. It's gone on for far too long. and we can try stabilize and improve our education system eventually.
Well, the problem with this is, of course, it infects everything. It gets into sport, it gets into
Everything.
education, it gets into
Everything.
society, social media, of course, which is the most toxic part of it. And there's really some look. I mean, the South African courts have prosecuted Black South Africans for racism, and coloreds and Indians, but especially whites. But the number of Black South Africans who've been prosecuted, and then, of course, then the really obvious cases of things that are truly double standards, and that's what got Ronaldo Gos in trouble for a video produced about 16 years ago, talking about the hypocrisy of how Jacob Zuma and Julius Malema can run around and sing "Kill the Boer, shoot the Boer," and there's no consequences to that. That's an incitement to violence, and we've seen this with farm attacks in rural South Africa, where people's blood has been painted on the wall saying "Kill the Boer," quoting the song in English and in isiZulu. It's a really frightening prospect that you have a dual system of justice. We have the same thing here now. We have a former president convicted of a crime that exceeded the statute of limitations and a crime that the court had no jurisdiction over, bootstrapped together and introduced a closing argument. So the defendant had no opportunity to defend himself. I mean, that's a Soviet trial. It's unbelievable what's happening in courts around the world. The purpose of the state is to ensure a level playing field, so we all have a fair chance to compete and to succeed in life, and to punish transgressors who break the norms of society, not to use the court to target white South Africans or to target your political opponents in America. It's really disheartening in so many ways, Richard.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think one of the biggest casualties of identity politics is the rule of law, because you come up with these ridiculous standards where you expand the definition of racism, right? There's at least three different ways that they do try to expand the definition of racism. The first is to talk about microaggressions, which is encompassing of a range of human behavior that's perfectly normal. Mispronouncing someone's name, complimenting a black child can be seen as being patronizing. That's a microaggression. Criticizing a black child is a microaggression. Complimenting and criticizing children are the two sort of roles of a teacher, really. And so on. I mean, so microaggressions is the one thing they do. The next thing they do is cultural appropriation. And this is where you wear an item of clothing that's not from your culture. So that's if a white person were to wear like Zulu beads or something, they'd get fired. And the third thing is systemic racism, and this is a concept imported from Robin DiAngelo. And this is where, if you look at any particular outcome in life, if the people who are picked for the netball team are not perfectly matching the province's demographics, that's an indication of systemic racism.
Well, I was going to get to that. Let me interrupt for a second. The netball. A couple of years ago in the netball semifinal, a team won the game. I actually caught part of that game. They won the game, and then they had to forfeit it after the game. It was thrown because not enough white players were on the court. Because of something bizarre story like that, and this is an absolutely bizarre situation in which their victory was forfeited because a white player was injured. They didn't have any white players, so they put another black player on there, and they exceeded their quota during the course of a game because you get so many minutes, you can get away with that. Absolute insanity, and this affected these girls because netball is a paying career in Australia, in England. These girls can go and make a living there, and now they don't get to showcase their talents in the final. This is sick and twisted.
It's destroyed sport. Yeah, absolutely. So it's absurd. But if you do hold white people to this extremely high standard where the slightest infraction is regarded as being racism, the rule of law dictates that you have to hold black people to the same standard. So if at Pretoria Girls High we find a WhatsApp group that only consists of black girls, then are those girls going to be put into a disciplinary? I sincerely hope not, but the rule of law requires that they will, if fortunately these white girls are found not guilty. And it's the same with microaggression. So if a black person were to say something vaguely hostile towards a white person, is that a microaggression that should require the black person to be disciplined? Well, if those are the rules, those are the rules. But obviously it's not going to happen. So what ends up happening is that you end up destroying the rule of law, because all of a sudden people are not equal before the law. Your virtue in the eyes of the law depends on your identity. And so everything starts to unravel. Your whole society starts to unravel. Your legal system unravels. And you very quickly end up in a situation that is tyrannical. And that, unfortunately, is where we are getting to in South Africa. And I fear that's where the United States will go, and many other parts of the English-speaking world will go, if we don't put the brakes on identity politics and critical race theory.
Well, 100%, and so let's talk about cultural appropriation very quickly. I didn't know we were going to get to that, but let's talk about that. So I find the whole cultural appropriation thing to be absolutely comical because, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. There's a reason why people go to Chinese restaurants, and many of them not run by Chinese. There's a reason why people go to Italian restaurants aren't run by Italians, because people have imitated that food, that culture, and it's appreciated. So, when you imitate somebody, unless you're doing it to mock them, that's actually a form of flattery. And to call it cultural appropriation is comical. And then the lies about cultural appropriation. In America, this nonsense, braids, that's a black thing. No, it's not. My Viking ancestors braided their hair 1,200 years ago.
Yeah.
They never met a black person in their life. So shut your yap hole. You know what you're talking about. That's ridiculous. And then, by the way, my ancestor, I trace my ancestry back to the year 565 in Sweden, but my ancestors in England, by the way, Anne Boleyn, I'm descended from Anne Boleyn. And last time I checked, the child was whiter than I am. No black person, but she's being played by a black actress in a Netflix series. What is that all about?
Has a problem with that.
That's cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
And then this was when it first started in the 1990s. Listen, fictional characters, one thing, but fictional characters that come from folklore, like Irish folklore or Icelandic sagas or the Grimm's fairy tales, a collection of tales from German forests that were collected by the Grimm's brothers in the 19th century and published. Cinderella was not black. But last time I checked, Brandy, at the age of 16, was very dark pigmentation, and she played Cinderella in a Disney movie. Isn't that cultural appropriation?
Well, this is the whole point. Is that it? I wrote an article on this about St. John's College in Johannesburg because the deputy headmaster, the day before Heritage Day, sent out an email saying, "Please don't commit cultural appropriation on Heritage Day." And I looked into this, and there was a woman in the United States, in Utah. Her name was Kezia Dawn. She was a white 18-year-old high school student who was going to her prom. What in South Africa we call a matric dance, and she was wearing a Chinese dress called a chi pao. And I'm going to just share my cell phone screen with you, which is very inexpert way of sharing this, but it's the best we've got. And there she is wearing a lovely Chinese dress. And anyway, someone went onto Twitter and said, "My culture is not your goddamn prom dress," and that got 168,000 likes. And Dorm's critics were basically said that she was discrediting the cheap hour dress by wearing it, which is ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. Of course, people are welcome to wear items of clothing from other cultures. The only thing you shouldn't do is degrade someone else's culture. I think would be unacceptable if you were stomping on a Chinese cheap hour in the mud or something. Okay, well that would be unacceptable. But if you just want to wear the dress in the normal manner, there's nothing wrong with that. And what I thought was quite funny is I went onto Instagram and I went onto the profile of the deputy headmaster of St. John's College, and I found him wearing a suit. There he is wearing a suit, which is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with wearing a suit, but this is the guy who wants to get people into trouble for cultural appropriation. Now, a suit emerged in 19th century England in the court of King Charles II. But it traces its origins to the court of King Charles II in the 17th century. And anyway, here he is wearing a daishiki suit and a Yoruba aso oke hat, which come from Nigeria. So, if you go onto his Instagram account, you'll find him wearing clothes from other cultures. Now, I have no problem with that. But it would be nice if he extended the same courtesy to everyone else, so that again, the iron law of woke hypocrisy is just, it never fails, right? And we need to point that out relentlessly, so that these people lose credibility in the eyes of the people who they seek to shepherd and bully, frankly.
Well, I think that's the key here, and that reminds me of something real quick. Let me write this down so I don't forget it. That's what's his name there? A radio show. So there's a couple things here. Number one, I was gowned in Liberia, and so I have a purple traditional chief's gown. I was gowned there for my experience and what I contributed to Liberia, and recognized informally as a traditional chief in Liberia. So is that cultural appropriation when I wear those things? And I wear that. And I wore it when I went to Botswana, and we had a big HIV conference in 2008. After I left Liberia, I wore it, and all the Africans loved it. They absolutely loved it. It came from all over the continent. They really appreciated it because it was genuine, and it was me. That's mine. I own that.
Yeah.
If someone accuses me of cultural appropriation, I'm going to give them a little something. Yeah, but then so let's go on to Rachel Dolezal. I don't know if you remember the case of her, the woman who pretended to be black in America. By the way, she has an OnlyFans account now. If anybody's interested, I'm not. But
really,
yeah. She's been fired from jobs repeatedly because people find out who she is, and she's still pretending to be black, and she's not black at all. But the other one I want to get, there was a radio show. I'm trying to remember the name of the. He's a black conservative radio host in America, and I was actually listening to the show live. This is about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was out exercising, and she called up, and he's got a deep husky voice like this, but not a typical African American voice. And this rising social activist, black supremacist from Twitter and elsewhere came on, and she says, "Well, the problem is, of course, is you don't even recognize your white privilege. It's men like you. It's you." And he goes, "I'm sorry, but don't you know that I'm African American? I'm black." So her my point there is exposing these people and getting them discredited. She was discredited. She's gone. I can't even remember her name. But she was the hottest new, woke black supremacist, all this white racism system. And she was rising because of the garbage she put on Twitter. And then all she did was go on that radio program, which is a nationally syndicated program, and tell him that, his white privilege. And he's like, I'm black. So she was completely discredited. And so that's the point I was making with that, is discredit these people. But I mean, cultural appropriation, give me a break. As long as you're not intentionally mocking or insulting a culture, there's nothing wrong. I have a kimono from Japan. I was at the Springboks in the All Blacks game, which, by the way, I thought we should have won. But anyway, in 2019, I was at that game, and when I left the game, I went to the train station, and I had seen a few people with these kimonos on, Springbok theme, green and the yellow stripes down here, and I couldn't find them anywhere. I'm in the train station in Yokohama, and I saw them, and they're equivalent to $75 US. I'm like, man, that's a lot of money. I'll never see it again. So I bought it. So I've got it. Can I not wear that kimono? Am I insulting Japanese? No, it's ridiculous.
We need to stop allowing these people to. What this is about, it's about power and control. It's a typical bullying situation. It's a highly abusive, extortionate relationship, and you simply just say no to these people. And they thrive on fear. They thrive on self-censorship. And when you stand up to them, they actually back away very quickly. Because the whole concept of cultural appropriation, just like microaggressions, systemic racism, it's all complete nonsense. There was one other person I was going to mention is Liz Warren, the senator from Massachusetts.
Pocahontas.
I saw Pocahontas. She claimed she was Native American, and then she got people were laughing at that claim, and then she went and got a DNA test, and she is like 1/400th Native American.
She's
but it's
less
so remote.
Native American than Donald Trump, by the way.
Yes, something bizarre. Anyway, I saw a meme on the internet yesterday. I think someone had a picture of a white 4x4 truck, and they said this is a Liz Warren, right? Because it was a Jeep Cherokee truck, but it was completely white. Okay, so
I'm surprised somebody hadn't thought of that sooner. That's
white,
good. That's good.
It's white, but it calls itself Cherokee.
That's funny.
So look, I mean. The one thing these guys can't cope with is mockery and laughter. So by all means, be legal with them. But I read something last week which said, don't engage, expose.
Yeah,
and I think that's probably the best tactic with woke activists is, by all means, if you're in a disciplinary like we were in a week or two ago, you do need to engage with them. You need to fight them, and you will win. But the most effective way to disable them and to dismantle their power is actually not to engage with them, but rather to point at them and laugh in front of your own audience. And that's what I try to do.
Well, I do
and
this.
Then you build
I do
up
the
an
same.
audience.
I've been targeted by this lunatic who goes between Amsterdam and the coastal route, the garden route in South Africa, and targeted me because I'm actually friends with Steve Hofmeyer, and so that really hurts his feelings. And so he's targeted.
Yeah, I got an email from him today.
Oh, about me?
Yeah, what's his name?
Yeah, I'm not going to even give him the oxygen. Yeah, he's a clown.
Yeah.
He's a clown. He's actually threatened me. I mean, hey, look, if I had the time, I'd get lawyers in South Africa to go after him. But the best bet is just to discredit people like that, to make nonsense. But it's funny because I get attacked from the left and I get attacked from the right. It's crazy. So yeah, but they tried to do the same thing. I interviewed Barry Hilton. He contacted Barry Hilton. And Barry's manager contacted me and was not concerned, but just wanted to find out what's going on. This guy's tried to scare away my guests many times, and all he's doing is preventing people from having good discourse about what is affecting South Africa and what's affecting the world. And that's, it's just sad, people. So discredit this.
Yeah, no. I looked into it just instantly, Chris. I mean, I got an email from him this afternoon saying, don't come on a show. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. I took it seriously, and I looked into his claims, which I thought were not substantiated. And then I said to him, I'm happy to discuss anything with anybody, and I don't take responsibility for the other person and their entire life story, and I take responsibility for what I say. Anyway, so he sent me a few more emails, and became increasingly bizarre. And I then decided I really had an obligation to turn up and participate this evening, because I'm not going to let people use me to try and cancel other people. I think that's obnoxious.
Oh, I agree. And, I agree 100%, and I appreciate that. And I had no idea that this clown reached out to you, but it happens frequently, and it's really sad that people do it. It really irritates the heck out of me that such people are allowed to get away with the nonsense they get away with all over the world, whether it's here in the States or in South Africa. But, that gets us back to, how people use things. It's very interesting. And if you don't want to talk about this, we don't need to talk about it, because I haven't talked about it in a while. But I was doing a program called Wednesdays with a Colonel with Ronaldo Jose out of Port Elizabeth. This is before I became a member of Parliament. Every Wednesday we talk about South African politics, what's going on, U.S. politics, and Ronaldo is ironically left of center politically. He's not a conservative. I'm slightly right of center. He's slightly left of center. But so what happened with him isn't it interesting that the video, which was previously brought up by the media, was actually a featured story about 7 years ago by a media outlet showing Ronaldo and other 10 years ago, and other young social media influencers in South Africa. And they actually took a clip from that video. They didn't show the profanity, but they took a clip from that video. And this topic came up. Then it was brought back into the press about 5 years ago when they tried to target him. But this video is released, and it's released in an altered state by the Independent Online. And false claims are made just before. Well, if you see the actual original video, look, I mean, he's like 26 of the time. He says things he shouldn't say, but he's doing it in an academic standpoint. Another saying, look, I mean, if Zuma and Malema get away with saying these things, it's just wrong. If I were to say the following, and then he says these nasty things, and then he comes back and says, but of course, I don't believe in any of that. That's nonsense. And that's essentially what he said. That's not the video that was released to the public by the Independent Online. It was an altered video. And then, of course, everyone wants to call for his head. So, look, youthful indiscretion, bad judgment, because in South Africa, anything you say, like, for instance, this clown coming after me, I was at an event with the Sightlanders. I talked to everybody. I talked to, across the political spectrum. But I was with the Sightlanders at an event in 2022, and I was describing how safety can disappear. And I talked about, I'd gone to the Akon concert, which, by the way, he did one song, unfortunately, because of what happened. But I went to the Akon concert, and I talked about how the police, because we had like 50 people, and within 5 minutes there were 5,000, are trying to flip vehicles over. Lives were in danger. And the police came out with sandbox. And I said that everybody, what did I say? They said they fled like, a certain type of insect. And this guy who's attacking me says, I'm going to send this to the South African Human Rights Commission. He called black people this. I didn't call anybody that. To assume that only black people were at the concert is actually bigoted and probably a bit racist. There was a very diverse crowd of people there from the diplomatic community from all over the world. But people split like that anyway. So it's just these games these people play is really, really sad. And it has an impact because whether you and I get along now or in the future or not isn't germane. But this conversation is important and people should hear it, in my belief.
Yeah, I believe in freedom of speech, and I believe in treating people fairly, and with a number of these incidents, and I've seen it in the context of schools. I mentioned the Polisi Manaki case. I mentioned Keith Arlo. I've mentioned what happened to these girls at Pretoria High School for Girls. There is just a tendency to completely misrepresent what people say and do. And I think that that's a form of bullying, and I think it is unacceptable. And I think we need to push back as hard as possible against people who are outrage manufacturers. And I think the key to that is to get to the root cause of this, which is the ideology of critical race theory. Most people don't want to go down that rabbit hole, understandably, because they've got better things to do. than read Robin DiAngelo or read, like Foucault and Derrida, the French philosophers who started the deconstruction movement in France in the 1960s, and then Judith Butler. These people speak in a very verbose way. They use very complicated, highfalutin language. Nobody wants to read that stuff, but you kind of got to go at least a little bit down that rabbit hole to understand what's going on so that you can tackle them on their own terms. Because it is very intimidating when they come for you. And it requires real skill and experience in order to resist a woke onslaught, which is what we did this past week at Pretoria High School for Girls. I ultimately believe in being charitable towards other people. I believe in being relatively forgiving. I believe that we should try and I certainly believe we should not be misinterpreting other people's words, and we should give people a fair hearing and a fair go. And the whole cancel culture thing is just toxic, and I'm here to fight back against it, which is why I'm on your show, Chris, because I could easily have said, oh no, I'm not going to touch Chris Wyatt, but I looked into your work and I didn't see anything there that was immediately concerning. And even if I did, you're Chris Wyatt. I'm not Chris Wyatt. I'm happy to have a conversation. I mean, why not? You
sound like an adult.
Why not?
You sound like an adult.
Yeah, well, that's how adults behave. I mean, otherwise the world becomes a miserable place.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. We probably won't go that much longer, although this is a lovely conversation.
Sure.
I don't want to keep them all day, but I do want to cover a couple more things. I like the term you use there, outrage manufacturers. That's I call it the grievance merchants is what I call it. You can use that. You can use that if you want. But the problem in South Africa, well, it's everywhere actually. But the thing about South Africa, I'll get back to it in a second. In America, if you slander somebody in the press, or if you libel them in the press, libel, that's the term. If you libel someone in the press, there can be very serious consequences. Look at the Covington kids and the lies that were spread about them by CNN and others. That was a multi-million-dollar settlement to those kids. We have no idea what the settlement was because it wasn't disclosed, but they made a lot of money.
Okay.
That was the Covington kids went to D.C. and this Indian came up and beat a drum in their face and harassed them. And the kids never did anything. And it was turned into a racial incident. And actually, he was the one being the racist and bigot. He was also claiming false honor, stolen honor. He claimed to be a Vietnam veteran. He wasn't. He served in the army during Vietnam in America, not in Vietnam. But anyway, so we have...
That's a serious offense in America to claim to be a soldier, right? But you're not.
Oh no, stolen honor is a criminal offense. It's a federal criminal offense. Yeah. No, if you go about wearing rank or uniform insignia and wearing decorations, that's a criminal offense. It's a federal law violation, and it's a very serious matter.
Rightly so.
Well, and we had Mike Borda, who was the chief of naval operations. That's a senior officer in the Navy, who committed suicide over falsely being accused of having stolen honor back in the 1990s. He was accused of having an award with a Valor device for Valor. They said he didn't earn. Well, in fact, he did earn it, but the shame was so great. Well, we don't know if there was something else, but he committed suicide in his office at the Pentagon. It was pretty horrific. So it's a big deal. But the outrage manufacturers, the grievance merchants, but there is a real issue here. In South Africa, you have crimina injuria, and people can be taken to court over this, and that's a serious issue. So I know someone who's a personal friend whose life was utterly destroyed over that Sky account on Twitter. She wasn't Sky, and this lunatic attacked her, claimed she was Sky, contacted her employer, cost her job, cost her custody of her child, and drove her nearly to the brink. Completely destroyed her life, upended her life, made her miserable, and the end, she won a judgment against this clown after Sky came out. It's of course it's an American comedian's wife who's Sky. I also know her.
Yes.
I didn't know she was Sky.
I know them. Yeah.
I had my suspicions she was Sky, but it certainly wasn't the other person. And all she got was 30,000 rand after this guy destroyed her. He didn't get no jail time. I mean, this is insane that such things can be done. These people must be discredited, exposed, and punished if there's a legal venue for it.
I agree 100%. I know those two individuals. I don't know Sky, but I know the American comedian and his wife, a lovely couple in Cape Town. I agree with you 100%. I wish I had the ability to do it, but I'm not a litigation specialist, right? I'm a lawyer, but I'm a non-practicing attorney, currently working in a different field.
Well, I know a few practicing attorneys in South Africa.
Good. I'm very serious about this. This Pretoria High School for Girls, there have been a number of people who need to face civil and criminal sanctions. So civil would be defamation lawsuits against a number of individuals at the Gauteng Education Department, as well as journalists and broadcasters who completely failed to exercise any restraint and who continue to this day to defame the children. I sincerely hope that they're sued for defamation. And then I also sincerely hope that we test the law of criminal injuria, which is criminal sanctions for destroying another person's dignity or reputation, effectively the criminalization of defamation. I have a panel of lawyers who have volunteered on this Pretoria High School matter. I sincerely hope that they have the energy and the time to take this matter forward. Perhaps we need to raise funds. Perhaps they'll do it on a no-fee basis or a combination of the two. And the last time I checked, they were up for it. They were absolutely up for it. And so let's give them a bit of time to catch their breath, because last week was quite something. But I hope that they proceed and we make a real example out of this, because it's the only way these people are going to stop. I thought they would have stopped after my first essay. I wrote a second one. They still proceeded. I wrote a third one. They were humiliated on Friday when the result came out. And then today they put out another statement saying, oh, we're going to launch a new racism investigation, completely open-ended, on the basis of absolutely nothing at all. And there comes a point where you say, right, the only way you guys are going to learn is if you have a $1 million defamation case and a jail sentence, which is what they deserve.
Well, the IOL went after the Gulam MV account and exposed a lecturer from KZN and a part-time comedian. And then they try to double down on it by doing a video, and they just give 1 minute of a 5-minute video to apologizing. Then they blame him, and Survey, the guy that runs the thing, comes out and is on attack mode, attacking the KZN lecturer. And when they talk about him the next time, they just call him a comedian. Well, that's something he does part-time, trying to undermine. But back to the story in Pretoria Girls High. I mean, this thing here that was said today, the release, it's even more egregious, like I said, because they said that there was insufficient evidence. They're piling on here. That's what the IOL said. That's not what the Gauteng release said. They talked about bullying, disruptive behavior, all lies and misleading stuff. It's shameful. Let me share a quick story with you real quick, Richard, before we wrap up, about getting engaged with lawyers. Okay, so after the 2020 municipal elections, my audience knows this, and the hate wanker who contacted you knows this, but it doesn't seem to affect his view. For some reason, he's hell-bent on me. I don't know. Maybe he's in love with me secretly. I don't know. That could be what it is. And it's the way he's getting attention. But so in the 2020 municipal election, I contacted an elections analyst, Michael Atkins in South Africa, who does independent elections analysis. And one of my viewers said, talk to him about it. There's been some anomalies. One was with the Cape Independence Party, which they used to call themselves something else, Jack Miller's party. And then also, but that I didn't want to focus on that. But when I heard him say that one happened in Zeerust, okay, Botswana. I used to live in Botswana, and I have a special affinity for the Tswana people. So I listened to this and found out that a small party that was Tswana-based that formed up for this election, called the Forum for Democrats, who are frustrated with the ANC and all the other parties, they campaigned and they didn't get any seats. But the reason they didn't get any seats is because someone put 194 votes in a column for a ward instead of 19. The EFF got 19 votes, not 194. Bottom line is that their seat was taken away from them. The elections analyst contacted the IEC. The IEC told them footseq. Then the party contacted me and said, it's too late. It's been 2 weeks. That's not the way the law works in South Africa. I know how it works. So I got in touch with a lawyer in South Africa who got me in touch with a civil rights organization that was looking for a test case, and they went forward with it. 2 days after the letter got to the IEC, they responded and said, you're correct. We made a mistake. This is after almost a month of ignoring everybody. You're correct. We made a mistake. They sent a letter to the Zeerust Council and told them to remove the EFF member and put the other person on. But they didn't do it. So they had to go to court, and it took 6 months that the EFF had a seat. But my point here is that when attorneys show up with letters, a lot of times people start listening. And that's why I'm saying these people that are behaving in this fashion, especially when they commit criminal injury, and this certainly appears like a criminal injury case to me against these girls, they should be they should be prosecuted, not persecuted.
The law works, Chris. I mean, it really does. If I were a billionaire, I would pick a case every week or every month, and I'd say, right, here's 100,000 rand or R500,000 or R1 million or whatever it costs, and I'd have a panel of attorneys and advocates, and I'd say, guys, please just run with this case. And I am highly confident that we would win 99% of those cases. Unfortunately, I'm not a bored billionaire, so I don't have limitless financial resources. I don't have any financial resources, but I do have the ability to write essays. So that's my contribution, is to try and enlighten as many people, to try and educate and to motivate people to understand what's going on. And then I don't know where we're going to find the money, but either we have pro bono legal assistance or we put some money behind it. And if we do that, I'm convinced we'll win. On Pretoria High School for Girls, I think that gets multi-million rand damages against the people who have caused so much grief over the last 2 weeks. And then I've got a list that is so long it could run into multiple pages of people who have suffered egregious harm due to woke activism. I mean, one guy in particular, Professor Bongani Mayosi, was a university lecturer at the University of Cape Town, and he committed suicide after being subjected to abuse from woke activists at the UCT medical faculty. You know, there's never been any accountability for any of that. And I would love us to have a bit of money so we could incorporate a non-profit, put some lawyers there, and try and make some progress.
No, I think it's fantastic. It's interesting. My first trip back to South Africa after the COVID scam eased was in August of 2022. Whenever I go to Cape Town, I typically am invited to speak at the Reformation Society, and I can pick any topic I want. This most recent trip was, of course, about South Africa and America's elections in 2024. But in 2022, the topic I chose was right, moral, and just. Right, moral, and just. Doing the right thing, always at the right time. Listen, Richard, it's a pleasure having you on the program. I think you're doing what's right, moral, and just by exposing this sort of thing. I try to do the same thing with this platform. Also, I get published as well. It's an uphill battle because the powers that be in the corporate world don't seem interested. In the legal world, sometimes they are. In the political world, this is a weapon they're using, a cudgel, to go after opposition or to gain power. It's very frustrating, but I think you're doing what's right, moral, and just, and I want to thank you for coming on. Also, I was unaware that you've been approached by my favorite stalker, so I'm glad that you've decided to come on. I really appreciate that. This probably happens all the time. It's just unknown to me. You know, I had during the World Cup, I know Nas Botha, and Nas and I I'd interviewed him in Bloemfontein a couple years ago, 2 hours. The two of us talked forever. I finally had to end it because my battery was dying on the phone. But then I hit the road. And then Nas, during the World Cup last year, wasn't on TV. And I wanted to do a preview of the World Cup. So right before I flew to France for a month, I asked him, I said, hey, Nas, you want to come on and do a preview? He came on and people loved it. And like, hey, you guys should talk all the time. And so I kind of put him on the spot and I said, hey, Nas, not to put you on the spot, but so, if you like, why don't you come on? I'm going to be in France for a month. I can call you up. We can do a short 15, 30-minute roundup of what's happening. He goes, yeah. So we did that for a couple of weeks. And then this clown went and claimed to have contacted Super Sport and asked them why their on-air personalities affiliating with white supremacists, a racist, a Klan member, all of which is slander and libel. Anyway, and then Nas, it just stopped. Nas couldn't do it anymore because of the...
Gosh, how sad.
That is sad. And we had hundreds of thousands of views. There were lekker conversations. And just imagine it's an American, and people think Americans know nothing about rugby, an American, and I was holding my own and challenging Nas Botha, the great Nas Botha. Incredible conversations. That's still on my channel, by the way, those videos. But I also came under attack by World Rugby, fraudulently claiming I stole their content from those videos, and there was no World Rugby content. So it was a fake World Rugby account that came after me, and I had to deal with copyright strikes. It was crazy. These people are demented. They have real mental health issues, and they need to be exposed.
Well, no, look, it's appalling. And look, Chris, if I could just say, it's wonderful to see an American person who takes an interest in South Africa and who is so well informed on many of the topics. Yeah, I mean, your knowledge of South African rugby, South African politics is extensive, and I often find many people around the world not that interested in South Africa, and so it's a real breath of fresh air to have someone who is interested. And you know, I'm grateful for the opportunity to come on your show, and I hope that your viewers enjoyed it, and yeah, hope to stay in touch in the future.
Oh, my viewers enjoyed it, Richard. In fact, there's been so many comments here, complimentary of you, saying you're well-informed, well-prepared, deep expertise in the subject, and people like, he's got to come back on here. He's got to come back on here. Lots of those. I saw that. Anyway, so yeah, so thanks a lot. Okay. Listen, if I can get you to hang on for just a moment, I'll keep you online just so we can chat for a minute or two afterwards, and I'll wrap up the broadcast, okay?
Cool. Thanks.
All right,
thanks
so you'll still hear me, but I've got you on mute.
All right.
Okay.
Cool.
But before you go, let me do this. I usually do this with my guests, and I didn't do it yet. Any final thoughts from you? Any final comments you'd like to say, maybe about the Pretoria Girls High or just this issue in general? I give the floor to you before I wrap up.
No, actually, I wanted to close with saying thank you to you, and thank you for your interest in South Africa, and for the work that you do. I think it's it's wonderful to have somebody who is in Pennsylvania taking an interest in South Africa. I take a close interest in America. I love America. I think America is a great country. I also think it's a great idea, and I think that if South Africa could be 1/10 as successful as America, we'll be a very successful country. And so, any opportunity I have to interact with somebody from the United States is an opportunity I jump to make the most of. So, thank you so much for having me on your show.
All right, folks, that was Richard. I've got to get it right because I want to say Wilkinson. It's Wilkerson. Wilkinson. It is Wilkinson, not Will. Yeah, it is. It is Wilkinson. I always want to say Wilkerson because we used to have razors called Wilkerson. Anyway, but my thanks to my guest. He was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I see from the chat that people really appreciate it, and you see the links that people go to shut down Cogent. Insightful conversation, folks. When he disclosed what happened, I didn't even know about that. That came out during the conversation. But my many thanks to him. We'll try to get him back on the program and talk about this issue, which is critically important in South Africa, in the U.S., and even in Europe these days and around the world. Listen, we're all Homo sapiens, ladies and gentlemen. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, chief among them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that's what you should be doing, not abusing others, and not using skin pigmentation, religious affiliation, ethnic origin to disrupt or destroy the lives of others. God bless everyone. Thanks for being here. I will be doing the news. I think I said it for now, so I run over a little bit. So the news will start shortly after this. Let me just have a wrap-up conversation with my guest offline, and we'll see you on the news program. You'll be automatically redirected from this live stream to Chris Wyatt Reports here in a few minutes. Y'all take care, and we'll see you in a few minutes on that side. Cheers.